Right. Welcome everyone online and in the room, and welcome particularly to our fantastic panel of speakers who are here today to talk to us about education and the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus. For those of you who are in the Zoom room, please take note of what's on the screen right now. Very important to use the Q&A box for questions and chat if there are technical issues that you need to have dealt with. And your closed captioning you can choose in several different languages if you click on that button at the bottom of your screen. So that is your agenda for today. You have seen it already in the information that was sent out for you. And we will move on to the introduction, a quick introduction of NORAG. So the work that NORAG does fundamentally is our first and most important principle is to advance knowledge equity. So it's about surfacing and amplifying underrepresented expertise, including, most importantly, from the Global South, from women, early career researchers, etc. And we also do this through publications such as the Policy Insights publication that you have heard about and probably have online in front of you now. And also so that is co-production of knowledge and also brokering policy dialogue as well as capacity strengthening. And we do those things in order for our stakeholders, all of you and beyond, to be able to act with that knowledge that you have been able to access and know, and also to amplify that further with that knowledge equity always in the South also knows initiative. Thank you, Yusuka. So we work in these 5 themes, and the work today is focused on the second of our themes on equitable education, intersecting with other SDGs and other non-education issues. And as well as being the Global Education Centre, we're a network of over 6,000 members around the world, 50% in the Global South. You're very welcome to join us. If you yourself are from the Global South, as you go into the questionnaire to join the network, it will say, are you from the Global South? If you click on there, then you will also join our South Also Knows network. So, with no further ado, handing over to Alison Joyner, who was the lead editor for this particular publication. Alison.
Thank you, Moira. And are you hearing okay in the back? Yes. Yeah, great, excellent. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to those online. Before I introduce our excellent panel here, I'll give a brief overview of this publication that you can see here. To which each of them contributed in some way or another. So the so-called triple nexus emphasizes the interconnections between humanitarian aid, development, and peace-building efforts. The approach aims to serve better affected communities by enabling local actors and leaders to manage and anticipate crises more effectively while promoting sustainable development and peace. The collection of more than 40 contributions which you find in this publication offers key insights and recommendations, richly illustrated with concrete examples, some of which we'll hear about now. And that's all about what has been achieved in the last 10 years, as well as the many current challenges and ways forward for the future, those 10 years since the first time the Nexus approach was coined as a phrase. So the term HDP Nexus does seem to go beyond jargon or a buzzword in practice. Our contributors show that communities, teachers, and learners prioritize a Nexus approach, even if they have never heard of that term. However, we also see that action at the global system level is lagging behind the promises of the Nexus concept as it plays out in countries. So we still have plenty to go for. So we can see on this slide a brief overview of the publication itself, and I'll briefly introduce each of the sections before we turn to our panel. So that we divided the collection into 5 pieces, 5 sections, but there are, of course, many overlaps between them. The cross-cutting themes of local leadership, the central role of teachers, and the absolute necessity of flexible long-term funding are present throughout the document. And there's a common thread that emerges also: the relationships that underpin a Nexus approach. Those between teachers, learners, and their communities, between teachers and representatives of the system, and between local and international actors. The crucial importance of mutual trust, respect, and flexibility at all levels is always emphasized. So the first chapter, Taking Stock, reminds us that the HDP or triple nexus is the latest expression of a long recognized concept. It examines coherence, funding models, and lessons learned. And Francesca's contribution comes from that chapter, who we'll be hearing from in a moment. Centering Humanity, the second chapter, focuses on the reinvention of education centered on human well-being, with examples drawn from psychosocial support, social and emotional learning, and community and social resilience. And Esther, online, will be speaking from that section. Critical to this process, of course, are teachers, the focus of the third section, which explores the crucial role of teachers in a Nexus approach, without whom, of course, no education will take place. And Lois Gichuzi, also online, will be presenting her contribution from that chapter. The fourth section, Leading Locally, offers a wide range of examples illustrating the value and necessity of transferring power to local leaders and solutions. And Anatazita Samuel, who is here now, will be providing some striking examples from that section. And finally, Building Connections, which examines, among other things, coordinating bodies and the importance of anticipatory action. And Adama, who's joining us online, will speak about Save the Children's contribution to that chapter. And I'd like to highlight, as you can see on the screen here, that to keep the conversation going beyond the publication of this work at Policy Insights last December, we've launched a blog series on the HDP Nexus. And if you flash the QR code, you can see the blogs which have been published so far, and also find guidance on what we look for in an evidence-based blog. So we encourage you to think about writing a blog if this is an area of interest for you, and we're always glad to receive submissions. So just before concluding, I'd like to highlight the diversity of the contributors, as you can see on the screen here. They come from 4 continents, and half of them are from countries in the Global South. And finally, as you can see in this final slide, the contributions cover a wide range of contexts, types, and aspects of education, from early childhood to university level, including accelerated education, educational technologies, school curricula, and teacher professional development. So I'm now delighted to turn to our panel, who are going to illustrate from the volume for us. We're going to start with Esther Mpao, online, who is the Psychosocial Support and Social and Emotional Learning Coordinator at the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE. Esther, your contribution comes in section 2 of the publication, Centering Humanity. And the title, Reimagining Education in Emergencies at the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Triple Nexus, a Psychosocial and Systems Lens from INEE's Beyond Aid initiative. Could you explain to us what you mean by a psychosocial and systems lens and how that connects to local leadership?
Thank you, Alison, for the question. It's an honor to be here today. And I would like to begin with the idea of centering humanity because it really anchors this discussion. When we speak about centering humanity, we mean placing the dignity, well-being, and lived experiences of people at the heart of humanitarian development and peace efforts. Too often, responses to crises become driven by technical frameworks, funding cycles, or institutional priorities. But for the people living through this crisis or through the crisis, what matters most is whether support responds to their real experiences and helps them regain their stability, safety, and hope. Centering humanity reminds us that crisis affects people not only materially but also psychologically and socially. Teachers may be carrying their own stress and trauma while trying to support learners. Children may be navigating fear, loss, and uncertainty while trying to continue learning. Communities may be coping with displacement, disruption, and fractured social relationships. If we ignore these human dimensions, even well-designed programs can struggle to make a lasting impact. And this is where a psychosocial and systems lens becomes important. A psychosocial focus is all about how crises affect mental health and well-being, relationships, and people's ability to function in everyday life. And conflict and displacement often creates stress, grief, and uncertainty. These experiences shape how teachers teach, how children engage, and how communities begin to recover. And hence, a psychosocial perspective therefore asks questions such as, how are people coping? What are the existing resources in terms of support and are present within families and communities? And how can education systems strengthen resilience and well-being during crisis? Alongside that, a systems lens helps us to understand how different parts of the support system interact. Education does not exist in isolation, so schools connect with families, community networks, health services, social protection systems, and government policies. A systems perspective looks at how these different actors come together and work together, and where are the gaps, and how coordination can be strengthened so that support reaches learners and educators more effectively. When we combine this, we begin to see how they connect with the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus. And the nexus reflects the reality of how communities affected by crisis actually live. Humanitarian needs, developmental challenges, and peace building are not experienced in separate phases. They happen at the same time, and people must navigate all of them simultaneously. However, many responses are still organized and fragmented in terms of short-term projects. These efforts often address immediate needs that are not linked to national systems or local leadership. As a result, once funding cycles end, many of the gains disappear because the work was never fully embedded in the systems that sustain communities over time. And this is where the psychosocial support and social emotional learning can provide a practical entry point into the nexus. When we support teacher well-being and create safe and inclusive learning environments, when we strengthen relationships between schools and communities, we are addressing immediate distress experienced during crisis. But at the same time, we're strengthening education systems and contributing to social cohesion and peace. These efforts naturally bridge humanitarian response, development, and peace building. And then when we look at the perspective of connecting this to local leadership, local actors, including educators, community leaders, civil society organizations, and local organizations, are often the first to respond when crisis occurs, and they remain present long after the international actors leave. So they have a deep understanding of the community context, cultural practices, and the support networks that people rely on. In many ways, local actors already work across the humanitarian, development, and peace boundaries every day. The nexus then becomes meaningful when funding and partnerships and decision-making align with this. So the real challenge is not the concept of the nexus itself. The challenge is whether global actors would be willing to adjust funding models, coordination practices, and power dynamics to support long-term locally led solutions. Ultimately, centering humanity through the psychosocial and systems lens means recognizing that recovery is not only about rebuilding infrastructure or restoring services. It is about strengthening the social fabric, supporting the well-being of educators and learners, and enabling local actors to lead solutions that are rooted in their own context. When that happens, then the nexus stops being a policy concept and becomes something that truly reflects the realities of communities living through this crisis.
Thank you so much, Esther, for that excellent and very clear and comprehensive response to the question. And I think you very clearly highlighted those connections, those based in those relationships in various different directions between people within system, etc. And I particularly appreciate the way you highlight the central role played by local actors at every point in emergency contexts and others, of course, in the way they live every day the situation. And this is a perfect segue into the work of our next panelist, Anna Tazita Samuel, who's a renowned child and women's rights activist and executive director of Women for Change South Sudan. A very warm welcome to you, Anna. Please could you elaborate on the part played by local organisations, particularly those focusing on women and girls, and how they embody the triple nexus, which is one of the phrases you use in your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Esther, for alluding much into the role of the local actors has been key in the triple nexus. And I could like to really say that the nexus played, particularly the humanitarian development and peace nexus is important because it's a necessary shift away from the fragmented, disintegrated, and disjoint structures and crisis management towards coherent context, specific and context-sensitive approaches. Speaking from a local women-led organization aspect, and where when crisis hit, they are left on the ground. When crisis hit, they are the first respondent, and looking at education as a key pillar, and looking at a context where, especially in South Sudan, where education is not given a key priority, and women are left behind. Children, I think it is also a very important aspect to discuss about the relevancy of the nexus. And we feel that the nexus is very important step in our context because it recognizes interconnections. It emphasizes the interconnection between humanitarian aid, development, and peace-building efforts, which mirrors the reality in affected contexts, for example, like South Sudan. And also it improves service and resilience. It is designed to better serve affected communities who are also forgotten, because in most cases, our approaches are leaving communities behind. Much as we said, we are putting communities at the center, but we found ourselves with our systems to see that communities are actually left behind, and we are moving ahead with the policies and with the structures which are already put, but the nexus at least brings that gaps. And also it enables sustainable outcomes. Taking the nexus approach is crucial for enhancing and fostering an integrated and collaborative action among the three sectors. As from the women, a local women-led perspective, and especially in our context in South Sudan, peace building is very key. And that is something that, because we can't have development without having the peace component in it. We can't have humanitarian. We are having a lot of humanitarian crises because we are not considering the peace component. Why can't we say, let's first have peace and then we embark on the development or on the humanitarian? With the absence of peace, the components, it becomes very difficult to achieve development in the country, and it also becomes very difficult to deliver humanitarian services in most of the context. And as women-led organization and also as a locally led initiative, we feel that those are very key in our response. And because of this importance, women-led organizations have embedded the triple nexus by ensuring that each program, despite the amount that is given to them, which we know that local organizations are always given a peanut, if I can say, to do their programming, And because of that, we have seen that despite of the money that is given to us, we have to adopt to the triple nexus, because we need to see that we need development, but we need to have peace. We need to do a lot of peace programming to enable us achieve the others. Without the other one, we can't do. We want to do humanitarian, but okay, after humanitarian services, what next? What is the sustainability? Development comes in. So the three are very key, and most of the programming that we do are really so basically to ensure that we use the approach. In most contexts, we don't know that this is triple nexus. Yes, but in reality, when it comes to what is being done, we are doing a triple nexus programming in most of the activities, and that is something which is very key for us. And they also consider the triple nexus because of the interconnection aspect, the resiliency, and the sustainability aspect to the affected achievements which are being done because of implementing the triple nexus. And as women or as local actors, we are really so much into saying that support toward the implementation of the triple nexus, whether it be in education, in emergency, or even in other aspects, is very key if we really want to have sustainability in all our programming, if we want to have sustainability in our education sectors, and also if we want to have a great impact into the communities, because without that, I think it becomes a dream that we are chasing and we are not achieving. Very many factors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that very powerful illustration of how important a Nexus approach is in South Sudan, and including that the centrality of education within that. And we see from your article that a top priority for those Nexus programs in South Sudan is often education. So I'm going to turn back now to the online, where we have Lois Gichuhi, who is a professor at Nairobi University and a leading specialist in the Nexus approach, and also in teaching professional development. And so Lois contributes to section 3 on teaching at the heart of the Nexus. So I'd like to ask you, Lois, if you could elaborate on the critical role played by teachers in a Nexus approach and the policies and practices that need to be prioritized in order to support them. Can you hear us, Lois? Sure. Good. Yeah. Excellent. Can you hear?
Sorry, I was talking when I'm muted. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
For having me in this meeting. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
You can hear me, Asante. So thank you so much for having me. I think that's a very crucial question. Teachers at the center of the Nexus. We know that just like my colleagues have mentioned, education is a key thing when it comes to responses and when it comes to responding on crises. We know that education is part of the key response strategies. And therefore, we know that the teachers are almost the second and sometimes the first contact point next to parents and guardians when it comes to the crisis context. The teachers become the center, and they are the contact person, the very first contact person when we want to stabilize the situation. So they are key responders. Part of responding must have teachers, whether trained or non-trained. They are expected to restore and maintain the normality needed within the learning spaces. Teachers are supposed to be interpreting the curriculum, and I'm happy you have mentioned that sometimes we do the Nexus without really knowing that we are doing humanitarian, we are doing development, we are doing peace. But when the teacher is interpreting the curriculum, there are some strategies that comes up Some are within the humanitarian, some are within the development, and some are enhancing the peace building process. So they are able to interpret the curriculum for the learners, and they come up with the strategies that helps the learners to acquire all the three humanitarian aspects, development aspects, and also the peace aspects. Now, we also know that teachers are agents in shaping the future, but because when we are talking about some of the durable solutions, we really would want to encourage how we reshape the future of the learners and the teachers themselves and the community. And one of the ways that we can reshape the future is by bringing development context within the humanitarian education, because we know that the crises have been prolonged in many circumstances, and therefore we may not just respond with humanitarian strategies. Sometimes, because of the prolonged crisis that we have seen over time, it is very important now that we come in with the development strategies within the education sector. And the teachers must be helping in reshaping this future. Because if we, for example, we have to reintegrate the learners within the host communities or within the host country, then they need to have some strategies that will help them to reshape their own future. If they have to be resettled or something like that, then they really need something that you carry them forward. The sustainable education that can come within the education sector, within the spaces they are learned, and the teachers become the agents in reshaping that future. Now, the teacher cannot achieve this if, for example, we don't have the teacher's agency. How do they make decisions? Because it's very important when you're looking at the teacher, and we help them to become part and parcel of reshaping the future of our learners. And therefore, we really emphasize on teachers' agency. How do they make decisions? Can they make decisions on their own? Now, some of the priorities that we would really want to do or to design in order to improve the teachers' agency and to help them to help maybe the host community, the governments, and maybe even where they came from. What I'm trying to refer to as the policy-driven strategies, so that they can help in the implementation, they can help in the design of the policy, and they can also have some evidence-based strategies. For example, we really need to prioritize teachers' well-being, and this has been mentioned by Anne. We prioritize teachers' well-being by providing mental health and psychosocial support. In many circumstances, we have seen, and I'm currently writing on research that we just did the other day from Kakuma, and the teachers are expressing themselves as facing occupational stress. So how do we make sure that teachers are in the center of development, in the center of humanitarian? We really need to prioritize their well-being and provide the mental health and psychosocial support that they really require, so that we can reduce or mitigate on the occupational stress that is persistence in the crisis settings. We also need to collaborate with the teachers to develop TPDs, the teacher professional development, so that teachers are not just subjects, or they are not just objects or implementers. They need to be part and parcel of what is going on. They need to be part and parcel of the curriculum design, so that even when they are implementing, they are happy that they own it. And when they own it, they are able to even contextualize some of the things that are supposed to happen in the classrooms practices. And therefore, we need to collaborate with the teachers so that they become part and parcel in the designing of our teacher professional programs. We also need to increase empowerment by standardizing certificates. I think one of the major things that we have in crisis context, and even when we talk about humanitarian development and peace, the teachers continue complaining that they are not recognized. They don't have certificates. So how do we make sure that we don't look at the teachers in crisis context as just humanitarian responders, and we look them as development agents, where we recognize them, we select them, we recruit them, we certify them, we recognize them, so that even within the host communities, within the host government, and even in their country of origin, they are able to be recognized with a certificate that is standardized. We are also talking about maybe establishing global minimum standards. I know we talk about minimum standards, but we don't have specific minimum standards for teachers in crisis context. I would wish that sometime in the future we would come with the acceptable minimum standards for the teachers who are teaching in the refugee crisis or refugee contexts.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think we need to wrap up there, if that's okay. So we have enough time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
To talk about your recommendations at the end. Thank you so much, Louise, for that very comprehensive and clear explanation of the very concrete actions that we can take to support teachers. I love your description of them as agents of the future, and the importance of teachers being involved in that policy development and the support they need in terms of well-being and teacher professional development. So moving on, we of course, in order to facilitate all of that, we need funding. And we're going to turn now to Francesca Pinna, who is seconded to Education Cannot Wait by the government of France, where she leads the Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis Financing Observatory. Francesca, based on your analysis of how international funding is managed and tracked in the piece written by ECW in this publication, do you think that the Nexus is just another buzzword?
Thank you so much, Alison, and good evening to everybody. So no, I definitely don't think it's another buzzword. And for this purpose, in 2024, ECW really started to prioritize understanding really what was the nature of the funding going to the education sector within the context that are most affected by emergencies and protracted crises, and really analyzing to what extent there was potentially overlap between what we categorize as humanitarian and development funding in terms of specifically contents of the funding and what we're actually funding in the education sector. So we did an analysis on 11 countries highly affected by emergencies and protracted crises. These countries include countries like Afghanistan, Haiti, Sudan, South Sudan, the DRC, and others. And we really tried to consolidate existing data that unfortunately are scattered in multiple information systems, but we specifically focus on the data within OCHA-FTS, which is the information system managed by OCHA, which is really intended to be tracking humanitarian funding. And we also use another information system called IATI, which is actually managed under UNDP, which is intended to have a more comprehensive overview of the funding that is going to the different sectors and is more timely compared to the information given by OECD. To keep it short, because I don't want to overburden you with the data details, but ultimately what we saw when compiling this data and of course taking away duplicates, which were very, very few, we saw that actually when we looked at funding to the education sector in these contexts, most of the funding is actually coming from what we consider non-humanitarian channels and therefore was not in OCHA-FTS. But also when applying some keyword filters and keywords such as emergency response, disasters, conflict, but also, for example, keywords related to displacement status, we saw that most of the funding that was triggered by these keywords was not funding that was labeled as humanitarian. So ultimately what this leads us to understanding is in fact that there is an increasing share of funding related to education and emergencies and protracted crisis themes that is actually coming from non-humanitarian channels. This was also confirmed by an analysis that was carried out by our colleagues at the UNESCO GEM team, the Global Education Monitoring Team. So they looked at the OECD CRS data, so globally, and they confirmed, in fact, that most of the EIPC funding is actually coming from non-humanitarian channels. And not only that, is that since 2017, funding that responded to these humanitarian keywords and that were coming from humanitarian channels decreased from 30 to 8% since 2017, meaning that the rest is coming from more development donors. And again, this is just, this is a lot of data and statistics, just to reiterate the fact that Nexus is definitely not a buzzword, because there is an increased commitment by donors, especially from the development space, that are investing in education in context of EAPC to really somewhat integrate emergency considerations, which of course is something that we can only hope for. And at the same time, of course, there is a similar commitment by the humanitarian donors. And of course, I'm speaking, as an ECW colleague. And as we know, most of the funding that we channel in the education space is through a specific program that is called multi-year resilience plan, that is really intended to have a multi-year funding for education emergencies and protective crises that is very much aligned with government priorities, but also education cluster needs and response plans, but that ultimately supports transition. What this piece is really about is mostly the difficulty that we had in accessing and consolidating this data. In fact, I would say the message, the underlying message of this piece is really the fact that how difficult it is to have information, and not just for donors, but also to practitioners working in the EAPC space, to really have an understanding of the total volume of funding that is going to education, who is funding and what and how this funding is being channeled, but also how many opportunities for alignment and synergies among the different humanitarian and development ecosystems are unfortunately not understood and not seen, because we don't have this consolidated information that is supposed to be accessible to all of us, and not just the data scientists and global research groups, but really all practitioners, including local actors, to really understand what are the funding gaps, but also what kind of funding could be leveraged that is aligned to our priorities, especially in a moment where funding is shrinking and needs are rising. So overall, I would say that the main message coming from ECW in terms of this piece and in link to this data analysis exercise that we carried out is the fact that the data, the way it's reported now, ultimately is reflecting a divide that still persists technically and strategically at the country level, but also the global level between humanitarian and development. And if the data, in fact, is not connected among these different information systems and data architectures, we will continue repeating the same kinds of divides rather than putting all the resources together and ultimately going in the same direction. This data needs to be accessible. Again, I wanted to reiterate, it needs to be accessible to absolutely everyone, whether it's me sitting in Geneva, but also a minister of education, but also a coordinator of the local education group or the education cluster, as well as a local actor working at subnational level. They need to know what is happening in the education system and how they can develop common messages that could possibly leverage better existing funding, attract funding from traditional donors, but possibly also try to access funding from emerging donors that express interest in investing. And again, it needs to be useful. This data is intended to not just be a transparency and a tick the box exercise. This is supposed to guide us towards evidence-driven strategies for education and emergencies in the funding space, but also in the planning and strategic phase. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Francesca. That was a very clear explanation of the complicated world of funding flows. So thank you very, very much for that, and connecting, I think, all the other pieces we've heard so far. So to complete our overview of the contributions to the publication, I'm coming now to Adama Diallo, who is a Child Protection and Education Emergencies Coordination Specialist with the Global Education Cluster. Welcome, Adama. So,
thank you.
Save the Children's contribution, welcome, great to see you. So Save the Children's contribution highlights the relatively new concept of anticipatory action. So from your extensive experience of supporting the continuity of education in all sorts of contexts, could you explain how anticipatory action fits with the Nexus approach? Or is it indeed just another buzzword?
Thank you, Alison. And first, maybe let me appreciate that you randomly brought in a panel in majority of women that are expert and less men in the so important subject, which is humanitarian development and peace nexus. And happy to be here today. So, but Alison, let me maybe first start maybe with a little contrast. I think most of us know the humanitarian work begin oftentimes after something really bad happened. So in our case, it would be flood that destroys school, conflict that had displaced families, children that had stopped learning, and then we come and respond. And this is something that most of us are facing and have seen in their work. But I think the anticipatory action, that's what it, at least it comes and bring in another different question. It says, what if maybe we acted earlier? And I think that's a kind of a common sense question. And I think that's where we wanted also to highlight in our article where anticipatory action connects with Next, because I think when we talk, and I recognize and I echo Estelle had said it, when we talk about humanitarian development peace, Next, I think the question is not the concept itself. I think the real question is how are we trying to change the way we work. And from maybe experience, we would say, going back to your question, that it's not a buzzword, but we need also to agree it can become an easy one if we still just at the discussion phase, or at least talking about it and not change really our system and the way it is working. And I think that's where also anticipatory action becomes really interesting. And the idea, I think, it's quite simple. And again, it's really a kind of a common sense. If we know that we can predict some kind of risk, I mean, floods, and if you look at the Sahel, you would know, and everybody knows, rain is coming around June, July. It's probably going, and it is maybe most of the time going to create flooding, school being destroyed, etc. So we know that's something that is happening in other areas, Central Africa. We know conflict has happened in one region, it is going really toward other places. We know that's something that is going to have an impact in the school and the continuity of education. So again, we might not want to wait until the crisis happens. So we should act before it hits, and we have that capacity to do it. So in other words, what it would mean for us as educators, it just setting maybe clear triggers, having at least agreeing or using some warning system that we have in place. And maybe the hardest part would be to what Francesca was highlighting, funding, really having that funding that could be released at an early stage. So, and I think when we do that, there is something really interesting, and we have seen it in different contexts and regions that is really important and interesting in a way humanitarian action and development work start to connect, kind of. So instead of waiting so the flood damage the school and then repairing, let's say, the school, or be able now to act earlier, we saw communities telling us we're just placing sandbag to stop the water to enter in classroom. Others would tell us at the school level what we would do is just moving school material before the flood arrives. So really cheap, if you can call it that way, cheap way of acting and having a better impact finally. And in our NORAD article, we shared an interesting example actually that speaks maybe to most of you in Burkina Faso, where there was a 5 years, if you wanted, education program that included a scenario planning and something they called a crisis modifier. So if the crisis situation got worsened, so they agreed that the program could quickly adjust its activity and budget. So development program would continue, it wouldn't stop, and then they would be able to adapt it so that it faces also the new emerging crisis that is coming. So yeah, but I think we maybe to that also, which is maybe a good kind of example, but in the contrast, we've seen also other contexts where education was not really included in national framework, I mean anticipatory action frameworks, where we would really bring in what we might call life-saving sectors. I mean, food security, health, shelter, which indeed are really important, but the reality is also when education is not included at first, then it shows something really clear and important, I think. So we miss education, so the nexus is really not working. The reason is, I think, also interesting in a way. When the school are closed, the consequences can be really long term. So again, development part, if you wish, so we have learning, the learning laws, protection risk, and all other maybe consequences that you know already, including even social instability. So maybe through that, I think that's where also our platforms like education clusters, like if you want to, are really important in that. In a way, they already bring in UN agencies, they would bring in government counterpart, they would bring in local organization. So they already create an existing space where humanitarian actors, development partners, and national system can already start working, and that's the case actually in different contexts. So maybe just to conclude, Alison, I think for the Nexus to become really to me, to become really something real, I think we need really to at least try to move or change at least some few things. I think it includes the way when we act, trying at least to act as early as possible, and this is through anticipatory action. And I think second, it is also linked to one of the colleagues that was talking about local and national organization that we want to really strengthen as much as possible. And third, I think it's also how our program are designed, making it as much flexible as possible to respond to the crisis. I think I'll stop here. Thank you. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Adama. That's a very clear and comprehensive explanation. Thank you for highlighting those key points around timing, local leadership, and program design. And also for highlighting that anticipatory action is basically common sense, and the fact that education, the centrality of education in any form of response is so important in order to ensure that continuity. So now moving to our last two panelists, before we have time for a few questions, I hope. So thank you for your patience. I'm very glad to be able to welcome Olya Homanchuk, who's a research fellow at ODI Global Development Public Finance Program. So Olya, I know that the Nexus has been a focus of your research recently, and indeed you have a panel on that on Thursday at 2 p.m. for those who are interested. We'd be very glad to hear your perspective on whether and how the Nexus can be made a reality.
Thank you. Whether and how the Nexus would be made a reality. So just before I dive into sharing my insights and thoughts, as you said, I'm based at ODI, but I'm working as part of a consortium called ERIC, Education, Research, and Protracted Conflict and Crises. And so we've been building this evidence base on what works for whom and at what cost in 7 contexts. And as part of that, I wasn't tasked to actually look at Nexus specifically, but I was looking at political economy of coordination in the sector. So within that, the idea of Nexus came up naturally, even though the studies were not designed as such. And on the one hand, we can answer the question and say that Nexus is absolutely not a buzzword because local actors are already doing the Nexus. NGOs are trying to build systems, and then, earthquake strikes or there's a flood and they switch to crisis mode, and then they go back to trying to build the systems. And as your research showed with ECW, actually the majority of funding comes from development sources. So it seems many actors are doing both development and humanitarian, so that divide is kind of superficial. For example, Global Partnership for Education, GPE, half of their countries that they work with are conflict affected. Equally, ECW is doing long-term response. So that can be seen as a nexus, or that can be seen as duplication of effort. And everybody's doing similar things in silos a little bit. And when we've looked at specific case studies, and I'll share example from South Sudan for the beginning, because we've had some insights, it's really hard then to grasp where complementarity is. Because there, it seems most of complementarity comes from not stepping on each other's toes and saying, okay, you go to this state or this district, and then our development education program is going to be in this geographical area. But then in terms of interventions, it's very much the same work of trying to make sure that teachers have salary or incentives, that there's some stipends to bring girls into education, school meals, the interventions are the same. But it's really hard to then see the complementarity or handover where context is a protracted crisis with spikes of floods or displacement. Another example is Northwest Syria. When I was interviewing NGO representatives from Northwest Syria, and this was before the fall of the Assad regime, they kind of laughed about when I asked about coordination and alignment, that they just giggled at me and they said, well, do you know that we have a development-minded project that is funded by a bilateral education donor, and it's delivered by Chemonics, which is a for-profit private provider. They're not at all included in the humanitarian education cluster system. I was like, oh, how come? Well, because they're private sector. So even though they're doing development interventions and they're supporting the public education system, because of the instructions from up above outside of Syria, we're not allowed to coordinate with them. So then what nexus are we talking about if for 7 years of the education response in Northwest Syria, there was a red line, we cannot talk to them, even though they support 50% of schools and all learning in Northwest Syria. And it's also interesting to add that NGOs and Syrians themselves had to kind of go around that dynamic between humanitarian actors and development actors not talking to each other, and share data informally. Because at the end of the day, what they've observed is sometimes there was duplication of efforts. So the development program was providing interventions in the same schools as the humanitarian cluster interventions. And so Syrians started to pull together lists of trying to see where interventions are taking space and sharing that among themselves to try to prevent duplication and ensure that areas that are more left behind also have some resources flowing to them. So just to say that local actors often find ways to persevere through the nexus. But with this in mind, would you like me to talk about the recommendations now as well?
No, we're going to do the recommendations at the end.
I'll pause. Yes, last thought. Another interpretation of a nexus that I see is this idea of a handover. So humanitarian actors will come in, build learning centers, and the idea then we're handing over that to the government, that they will observe those centers. I've just come back from field work recently in Northeast Nigeria, where conflict has been going on for a long time, and with the USAID withdrawal, there was many hopes that some of these learning centers will be absorbed. But the reality for kind of mid-tier technocrats and ministries, they say, well, I wasn't involved in the design any of that 10 years ago. And even though they have the resources, there's oftentimes the assumption that the handover doesn't happen because of the resources. That's not the case. They have the resources, but they don't feel ownership of those schools. They don't feel ownership. They've been left out of the dialogue. And now that the money ran out, they're supposed to pick up the pieces. So, yes, therefore, sometimes it is a buzzword. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Olia, for those very illuminating examples. Very, very powerful. Thank you. So now this brings me to our last speaker, who is a Burundian asylum seeker and a master's student at the University of Geneva. So indeed, we're delighted to have you here as a discussant, and I welcome you to share some perspectives, your perspectives on the HDP Nexus in the light of what we've heard.
Thank you so much. Just for context, I would like to say, as someone who was 10 years ago, I was in a refugee camp in Rwanda. And so I get a chance 1 year after, in 2016, I started my bachelor's there. So I already understand what it means for someone living in a displaced situation, going to the university, what it takes mentally, and also the PTSD and how it affects the integration to the school. And again, you're studying as someone who is not a local, like you are identified as a refugee. And the system, for instance, I come from Burundi. I did my high school in French, and diving into Rwandan system was university and in management. It's completely English system. So there's a pressure that comes with it. And again, someone living in a refugee camp and moving to in big town, like knowing that your parents, your siblings are back home, and all this pressure that's above your shoulder. I really know what it takes for people in emergencies, what they go through, and I start by appreciating, like showing appreciation to what's happening and all the humanitarian organizations, what they are doing, and also briefly, and also what's the actors are doing. And for those who haven't got a chance to read the publication, they should spend some time on it. There are so many interesting details, and I was so interested to see what's happening, and someone who's already seen what's happening in our education system context in the Global South, and someone who's doing the master's program here in Geneva. I already know the difference in system and how the triple nexus is very important for those people in emergencies, and the roles can play in them as people, but also as people in a very hard situation. So back to what you ask is, So listening to panelists, I found myself thinking deeply about what HDP Nexus really means in practice and why it matters. So we have heard so many technical terms in the past that sounded like promising, but failed to do anything on the field. So, but as I reflect on what the panelists have shared, both online and here, so I would say that I see the Nexus as something much more substantial because it represents a needed alignment on the system. It's a way of, it's forcing us to contextualize our work and connect humanitarian development and peace. And so that the efforts don't operate in silos. I think the expert has already talked about it. So we don't want to double the same effort doing the same thing, and it's a waste of energy, and it's how people doing the same thing twice. So for me, what really makes the Nexus meaningful is precisely its ability to shift away from short, fragmented, and reactive interventions. We have had so many examples, scenarios. And then it takes us toward a sustained and flexible collaborations, and then it involves the national actors. So it's like one big thing's working toward the common goal. So so this shift is not theoretical because its absence have serious consequences. And as someone who have lived, I will share with you one of my experiences. Like I said, I started in 2017, my bachelor's, and around 2020, I was in the third year. I was about to graduate, and again, COVID came in. So for us to, first of all, back a bit, like for me to get that scholarship, I had this program that was supporting connecting refugees with universities to get some education scholarship. So it's helped us with connecting us to universities, and which was good. I was one of those people who got the chance. But it's never improvised that situation like COVID. What will happen for refugees if COVID comes out? So in 2020, it was very hard for them to continue hosting us at the universities. So we had to shift the classes online. So for refugees, this means you have to go back to your refugee camp. And having classes online as someone who's about to graduate meant, and back in the refugee camp, I had no electricity and no internet. The internet was very limited. So I think most of the teachers here can really relate on what their students go through. So because the program that helped us to get the scholarship didn't improvise that, so they told us to just try to find friends who lives in big towns and try to find ways to stay connected and finalize our year, because first of all, there was an issue with the budget. So didn't plan about the budget, and then no contingency plans. So overnight, all my classes moved online, and then the program, like many humanitarian initiatives, was not built with long-term adaptability in mind. So the only immediate solution for us was trying to find more solutions. And then, so that experience showed me that exactly why a Nexus approach is not just a buzzword. So it's without system that prioritize long-term resilience and flexibility. So crises, whether it's big, global or local, affect the most those vulnerable. So people who are very vulnerable, like people in emergencies, are the ones that are very hit with such situations. I would say, like, for instance, if the program that gave us the opportunity to get the scholarship had adopted the Nexus approach, it would have helped with adapting to quickly adapting, and then also anticipating disruptions, and could have improvise some solution with how they could collaborate with the hosting communities. So this showed me that this experience is very important. And another thing that really resonated with me was the emphasis on people, especially teachers. So their mental wellness and their professional growth. I would say, coming from that situation with my personal life, my family, I was a bit sensitive. Like every time I get a feedback from a professor, like your work doesn't do this thing, like you don't match the expectation, please do this and this. For me, it was like a personal attack. It was like, because I'm a refugee, because I'm this, because I'm not from this country. So I think that requires a high emotional load for teachers to deal with such scenarios, trying to imagine you have 10 students who are like me in that situation. So I think the HDP Nexus approach is very important for such scenarios. And I think this is the high time to, because now we are witnessing a lot of changes in the world. in different contexts, political, economics. So I think this is the right time to start following what's being said in this room.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Really appreciate you sharing from your personal experience and demonstrating from that what it means. You said the absence of a Nexus approach has serious consequences, and you've lived that, and we really value that you've shared that with us. So we've come to the end of our interventions for now. We are a little behind the timing that we had, but we have around 10 minutes for you to ask questions, either from the room or online. So we would welcome your participation if you have comments or questions that you would like to share. Do we have anything online already? Yeah, okay, so let's take a round in the room and then we'll go online. Is that okay? Great, 1, 2, 3. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists. My name is Irene. I'm from Uganda. Yes, I was touched with what you shared about the scenario in Nigeria. As you were speaking, I was just remembering what I experienced a month ago in the refugee settlements in Uganda. Because I think people have forgotten that we have 1.9 refugees in Uganda. And 50% of these refugees are from South Sudan, and crisis still continues in South Sudan. Because any fire that leads in South Sudan, the end result is in Uganda. Now, the situation we're having in Uganda right now is that there are all these nice ECD centers that were built by the INGOs. Now they have left, they handed over them to local partners who were not part of the construction, by the way. They handed over the teachers to the ministry, who was not part of the recruitment of these teachers. Now, the teachers actually packed their tools and left the children with their parents. What we are seeing in the refugee settlement is children in the streets, playing, high mental health issues among children. Children are becoming very violent. We're actually having children who are now stealing from the host community because they want to survive. Food ration has been categorized. This was the food that would actually buy notebooks for children. It was the one that was paying the little school fees, maybe to put a child in school. It was the same food from WFP that was actually taking the parent with the children to get access to medical care. Now this is being taken. Now you are left with a population in the settlement who are neither helped by the government or by the local agencies, because you have actually not given them the resources that you used to use for managing these centers. You are giving them a quarter of the resources you used to manage the same center you managed 2 years ago. I think we need to rethink about the population we serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Yes, so the gentleman there and then here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Jonas Yabimana. I'm from Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm very happy to see how our panelists were discussing about emergency, peace, and development. I think that from my experience, connecting the three aspects is very interesting, but it has more involvements. First one, I think that we need to do a collective advocacy to donors, because it's not easy to convince a donor who is, for example, specialized in education sector or in food security or WASH. How is it for the donor the meaning of integrating peace in the program? I think we have to advocate for donors to integrate peace in their funding systems, and that can go also to be affecting their policies and procedures. The other issue is about programmatical issue, because when we have to integrate emergency peace and development, it requires also additional resources. This can be also affecting our programmatic issues. This is for why you have also to be reviewing our programs, our system. How are we going to integrate the three aspects? The last one is based on the stakeholder mapping. How are those specialized in emergencies connected to those working in development and peace, for example? And to be honest, from some of our countries, as humanitarian organizations, bringing peace sometimes is not our focus. It's a mandate of the states, for example. How are we going to involve states, governments, to ensure that they are also working with us to ensure that when we are responding to emergencies, government should have sometimes authority to negotiate with armed groups, for example, respecting signed the agreement related to peace, for example. That require also a coordination between us as humanitarian and governments, and also connecting, for example, partners specialized in development, for example. Because from some experiences, we have been working in emergency alone, and when we go to those who are specialized for development, for example, they are sometimes saying they have to stop because they can't invest in areas where situation still is more fragile. So I think these connections in terms of coordination between stakeholders should be also very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James.
Thank you very much. My name is Gloria Soma. I work for the TT Foundation from South Sudan. Mine is a little bit of a flip side question. When we look at the HDP Nexus, we see that a lot of the jargon is being conversed from, from different capitals, right? Where is the engagement with local communities? And again, it comes back down to the question of ownership really at the end of the tunnel, right? Because we are having all these jargons, having all these conversations up here, while we're doing HDP, but who are the actors? Who are the actors really involved, and who is the final person that's supposed to carry that forth and own it as a process? The second bit is particularly to the ECW colleague, where are we with localization when it comes down to ECW financing, especially to local actors, because we see a lot of layering of international players in that. So where is that conversation leading us really? Because we don't want to be coming here again next year and maybe when the project is done and you're handing us a center to take charge of and you are not involved.
Thank you very much, Maria.
And we wait till we collect
Do we have any questions online? Let's answer let's ask that. So we had, I think, 2 comments. I don't think we need to respond to those. So do you want to go first?
Sure. And just to say that I'm not like the director at ECW. I know we are working on the next strategy right now. But localization is indeed like a main focus of the big shifts that ECW is expected to make in the next strategy. Also considering, the huge funding landscape that we're working with, right? So, I mean, there is a huge, real message about we need to optimize these resources that we have, and the only way we can really do it is not only, of course, through HDP processes, but really putting local actors at the front and center of what we're doing. And there's a huge focus on not just simply focusing on localization as giving funds directly to local actors, which again, I can't really express because I know that they're working on trying to facilitate increased access to funds to local actors, but I can't speak to that because I think that that's something that goes a little bit beyond. But aside from that, it's about really like effective decision making of local actors throughout the whole process of the development of a program, ECW program, and its implementation. And the way local actors will be involved in the design and implementation of the program will be a criteria that ECW will use to choose actually the programs that will be funded, which is more of a commitment that was made previously. But there are colleagues of mine that are specifically working on this, which I don't want to speak for them, but that is a huge focus that we were asked to work on by our donors. And it's a huge element that ECW colleagues are going to put front and center as the strategy comes out, which I think will come out in the next months. But I can't tell you right now how much funding is actually going to go to local actors and why I can't. That's just not it. But I would be super happy to give you the contact of the colleagues that are like.
I have been working with some of their colleagues.
Wonderful. And of course, I think it's important to note that it's not also these commitments to localization have been done also through our governance structures, which include also huge and important advocates and practitioners and experts, coming from the local actor community. So yeah, there's been efforts. And so I don't know what the outcome will be next year. That's why.
Other local activist specialist, would you like to respond to the first point about the relationship? I think, as I understand it, the relationship between the words that are used in the capital and what actually happens in practice. Is that the right bit?
Thank you so much. Yeah, if I was not in the panel, I was going to ask the same question. Yeah, but I think as from the local actors' perspective, I think that is again a question that has been working our heads, because as we have always said, always discuss at the Geneva level, New York level, Brussels level, whatever level that is there. And knowing that as local actors, we mostly work with the intermediaries. The intermediaries who are having the headquarters in all the cities. Policies are made here. Now, when we go for accountability at the ground level, when we come said, okay, for example, agendas, what is happening with this? And they said, those things of yes are discussed at the global level. Again, they are referring us, they are giving us questions. However, any information that comes to us, like from really the approaches that we use, we always try to also inform our constituencies. For example, the CPOs we work with, the other organization. For example, I just want to give an example of the foundation works with the several national organizations, women's rights organization, and whatever is discussed here, she passes it to them. So again, that is how we also bring, and for us also, like Women for Change, whatever information that comes in the different spaces that we lead, the localization working group, the education clusters, the different clusters, we try to pass the information that look at the global level, there is something like this. So let's do the way it is supposed to be done. And whatever programming that we are doing, whatever ideas that we have, let's bring them up and also inform the global discussion. And that is what we do as local actors who have the, I can say, the smallest opportunities to say what is happening on the ground. But however, it remains a question. I want to really say that we do a lot of the engagement, yes, the facts that we do the engagement on the grass level, but in the most cases, who takes the decisions? That where is our problem is. And yeah, I think that is also the big question that we need to ask ourselves. Where are the locals at the decision-making spaces at the different levels? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I think you come back to the points made by Irina at the beginning about the ownership at local level. And indeed, this is the shift that is supposed to be facilitated by a Nexus approach. We have to hope that it's going to finally happen. So I think with the online questions, we'll respond to them by email, if that's okay, because unfortunately we're going to run out of time and we want to leave a few minutes for our final round of our panelists, who will each have 1 minute to highlight their top recommendation based on the next slide, please. So as you can see here, each of our panelists has highlighted what they see as the most important priority from their perspective based on their intervention. So I'm going to ask each of you to really take no more than 1 minute, because we have a total of, actually, if we can do it in half a minute, that would be even better. Sorry. So that we do have enough to this again for closing. So we'll take it in the order of the panel. So Anna, would you like to speak for 1 minute to your top, sorry, Esther, sorry. Esther, would you like to speak top recommendation? I apologize, sorry, I'm getting confused.
It's okay, Alison. My top recommendation is that we need to invest in national education systems to integrate psychosocial support and social emotional learning into everyday teaching and teacher support. In a context of increasing crises and shrinking funding, we can no longer afford short-term parallel projects that disappear when funding ends. So my key recommendation is let's invest in the national system so that PSS and SEL are built into teacher training, school leadership, and daily classroom practice. When well-being and social cohesion are part of the system, then we meet humanitarian needs, support long-term development, and contribute to peace. This approach is sustainable, cost-effective, and actually aligned with local leadership. That is my top recommendation.
Thank you so much, Esther, and thank you for that excellent example of how to keep to time. So passing to you now, Anna.
Thank you so much. I think also to be practical, the local actors have to be given more time, yeah? Leading from yeah.
Trying to be
Yeah, I just wanted to really give my recommend to start by saying that do we believe in education? And if we believe in education, who needs to be involved from the start? And how do we get there? And again, are the locally actions are involved or they are not involved? If they are involved, are they also involved in being given finances? And if they're not given finances, are we looking at sustainability? Are we looking at investing? By saying that, it brings me to my recommendation by saying that global assistance requires a structure and a principle realignment behind local leadership. Global actors must prioritize local ownership and channel more funding and leadership to local actors, especially WLOs. There must be a move away from the persistent financial and incompetent financing stream. This means that global structures must provide coordinated system and flexible long-term financing that can be rapidly adopted, for example, through joint donor approaches. And this can solve the problem of fragmented structures, and we lead a structural orientation of funding and leadership for effective society.
Thank you very much, Anna, for tying together so many things in your recommendation. So let's come now to Lois. Are you there? Can you give us a 30-second top recommendation?
Thank you so much. I think my take is teachers must take a proactive role in shaping their future. And this can only happen if they are given what it takes to be a teacher. The psychosocial needs, the well-being, their working conditions, certification, recruitment, recognition, and so on and so forth, so that they're able to be the agents of hope, the agents of a transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lois. That's very powerful. So now moving to Francesca.
Thank you. No, my message is very simple. Ultimately, we cannot coordinate and improve what we don't know and we don't see. So if we don't have information about the actual funding flows going to the education sector in this context, regardless of whether it's humanitarian development, we won't ever really be able to leverage it well and to create synergies and to create those funding bridges among the humanitarian development funding channels. And this includes information around who the funding is going to, where the funding is going, and what exactly is being funded. And of course, ideally, we would have this information for other sectors as well to see how we can also improve intersectoral relationships between the education community, child protection community, health community, environment community, and so forth. So, and of course, making it also more accessible will lead also to more empowerment of local actors to inform investments in the education sector and beyond in their country, and possibly, of course, take more of a leadership role.
Great. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adama, for your 30-second recommendation.
Of course, thank you. It will be a quick one. So to me, at least one of the recommendations that I would share is bridging that at least I'm using that bridging between the humanitarian development and peace actors. So happily, we have already the education cluster that brings already the government, the UN agency, as I was saying, in national and local organization. So those platforms already exist. So what we need now, I think, is to use those coordination spaces more deliberately. So to connect, if you want to, the humanitarian response with the development planning and peace effort. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you so much, Adama. That's great.
Trying to build on what Adama said, yes, there are coordination spaces, and underneath that is the financial incentive system. And it's very hard for committed individuals within humanitarian system to act in a different way, where at the end of the day, they're in a cutthroat competition for access to money to secure jobs and livelihoods for their staff. And so we have to really think about where are the incentives for people to disclose their data, to share best practice, to admit that they have maybe failed with this project. If there is a penalizing financing system that might kick you out of the game if you are transparent. So really trying to advocate, like a gentleman at the back, you said, we need to organize and lobby together for a different way of funding.
Thank you so much. Ejit, the last word goes to you before we come to the closing.
So just in addition, there should be an ecosystem where every skill, knowledge, resource should be shared, since they all have the common goal, and to build something that is long lasting, in addition to what I say here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that lifts us for the end of this session to some very powerful and concise recommendations and calls there. So the last few minutes go to Faiza Hassan, the Director of INEE, the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, which is the co-host for this panel. So we're delighted to welcome you, Faiza, to offer some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Alison. And thank you to all the panelists, to NORAG, and to everyone else who has joined today. I think what we've heard today from everyone in the room is that clearly the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus is not just a slogan for education actors. I think what we've clearly heard from everyone is that for those working closest to crisis-affected communities, this is already the reality that they navigate every day. And communities do not experience humanitarian development and peace efforts as separate tracks. I mean, people's lives cut across all three at once. And so the real question is whether the global system we have is ready to respond in ways that matches that reality. And I think today's discussions also reminded us that progress will come from breaking down funding and coordination silos, and from backing the leadership and knowledge and solutions that already exist at the local level. And I think what we've also heard clearly is that education has a unique role because it doesn't just sit in one lane, and it cuts across all the different pieces, from humanitarian to development to peace building. So I'll summarize and end by saying I think the challenge before us is really clear, and that is to match the realities of the lived realities of real people on the ground with the systems and the partnerships and the financing that truly supports it. And I think that's a big task ahead of us. So thank you very much to everyone. It was really interesting to listen to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Faiza, for those words of encouragement and looking towards the future. And I would like to extend a huge thank you again to our panelists. I recognize the fact that you're obviously all of your inputs, but also the fact that you respected time, and a lot of preparation has gone into this process. So I really do recognize that. Thank you. Before we close, I would like to just highlight the publication itself. You can get it on a flash code, on the QR code there. It's online, obviously, on the website. Please do read it if you can. And we also have at the top of the escalator, an SDG exhibition, which has been developed by NORAG and it started out last year in July on the waterfront beside the lake in Geneva. And it's done a world tour around various places, and it's at the moment back here in Geneva. So this is the work of Moira and colleagues. So we'd encourage you to go and look at this exhibition, which highlights each of the SDGs and its relationship to SDG number 4. Of education, obviously. So it has some inspiring information, and also illustrates the connections between education actors and all the various other actors in Geneva, international and national. So something to look at as you leave. And then just in closing, everybody who registered for this will receive a follow-up email, and we invite you to fill in the evaluation form. And if you're not already a member, to join NORAG, you'd be very welcome. And you'll receive also the recordings and events highlights of this event. And just before we show the last slide, this is the South Also Knows logo. Here's the QR code for joining if you are representing the Global South, and it's a way to support the process of amplifying otherwise less well-known knowledges. And as we've, I think, come to our final minute, I'm just going to leave this slide on the screen as you leave, which is some upcoming events, which maybe Moira you would like to speak to.
So the one at the top is one that we're doing in partnership with the UN Research Institute for Social Development, with the director of UN AIDS, and also the panel, the G20 panel on inequality. So this is a brand new initiative and part of their first panel, their first steering committee. We're working with them on this event. And also we have the book launch on data for accountability in education. So really coming to that point of what is the point of gathering data in a classroom for it to go to a bucket in the sky and not be used by the children, by the teachers and every other actor in the system. And then also we have this new project on looking at beyond 2030. So we welcome you to take a look at that. We have a launch of the Policy Insights, the next one that we have, which is looking at what the role of is higher education in the next global agenda. And also there's a blog series for that too, which you're very welcome to contribute to as well.
Thank you so much. And before we close, I would like to extend an enormous thanks to Yuzuka and Jennifer, without whom it would have been impossible to. Everybody online for that active participation. You'll receive the responses to questions online. And thank you so much to such a warm and welcoming audience. Great to see such good participation.